Hi everybody and welcome back to a new video on my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name's Leora and I talk on here about books, reading, writing and sometimes other stuff as well. And I'm really excited to finally bring you another recent reads video. This one is long overdue, and when I say long, I mean long, since like August. So apart from October, which I did a separate wrap up for, please check it out if you haven't seen it yet. It's one of my favorite video intros I've made in a while. But since then I haven't really filmed a recent reads video or a wrap up video. I still felt like I need to update you guys and like especially tell you about the books that really stood out for me and that I really enjoyed. So today I'm going to be doing just that. I have my Goodreads challenge right here with all of the books I've read since then, and I'm just really excited to get into it. Hi everybody, before we get on with the rest of the video, a small word from today's sponsor, our friends over at Book of the Month. So, as you might know already, Book of the Month is a super popular and fast-growing online book service for readers. Their mission is to help readers discover new and emerging authors, and each month their team vets through hundreds of books and makes a selection, and it's mostly new and early release titles, so it's always something new and exciting, something you were maybe already looking forward to, and this way, even if you're not really big on knowing all the new releases, you can still go ahead and read them, and this way you spend less time researching and more time reading. And next to that, Book of the Month is also risk-free, so you can skip any month, anytime, and not be charged, which is wonderful. They ship out to Canada and the US as well. In December, Book of the Month are running a special deal. You can get your first book for only $5 using the code WONDER. I think that is the best price for new release hardcover fiction out there, so definitely grab that chance. So now let's take a quick look at the books I chose for this month and I would recommend. Firstly, we have The Circus Train, which is a forbidden love set in 1938. It's historical fiction, it's a love story, it's set at the brink of World War II, and supposedly it's very tragic but beautiful. And then the other book I chose this month is Babel by Eric Kwong. I've already read this, absolutely enjoyed it. I thought it was so impressive and a really cool book. This is a dark academia story that is set out to discuss lots of themes of post-colonialism, colonialism, power plays, and racism, and it's very interesting. And if you're into dark academia, I would also highly recommend it. So those were my picks for this month's Book of the Month box. I really hope you guys enjoyed this little sponsorship bit, and don't forget to check out Book of the Month using my code WONDER to get your first book for only $5 this month, which is wild. So thanks again to Book of the Month for sponsoring my content, and now let's get back to the video. Also, recently I've been getting a bunch of new subscribers. I'm so happy you're all here. Welcome to my little nook of the internet where it's cozy and we talk about books and I show you guys my art and my life, and I just really hope you have a good time here. I hope you're doing really well today and you've settled down and grabbed like a nice cup of tea or maybe a cup of coffee, and you have like a little blanket all cozied up to have a little relaxing moment and watch this video, because you deserve that today. I don't know you, but I'm pretty sure you do. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's get into the books I've read. So the first book I feel really stood out from the rest of what I've read was during August, which is when I read I'm Glad My Mum Died by Jeanette McCurdy. I'm like 200% sure you've heard about this book by now, because everybody and their grandmother and their mother and their best friend has read it at this point. I have too. The only difference being I had not talked about it yet, so that's what I'm intending to do right now. So Jeanette McCurdy is a former child actress, child star. She starred in iCarly as Sam, and she had quite a troublesome upbringing, so a lot of the stuff in this book can be considered triggering. There's a lot of mental health discussions and it's definitely not an easy read, but Jeanette also reads the audiobook to you herself. And that was just so impactful, and especially like the little moments where her voice broke because she was emotional, like telling you this tale of abuse and hardships. That really got to me because you can hear it's difficult and emotional for her, and it makes you like realize it's a true story, it's something that happened to her, to this person telling this story to you, and that was just really emotional. I listened to it during my trip to Scotland, and I remember like walking around some old churches and beautiful places and listening to this story, and it was really wonderful. And especially when I was at the airport, I got like towards the end of the book and it started getting extra tragic and really sad, and I was so in it and I was so involved, and just everything that kept on happening, I was like, can't she just catch a break? And then I ended up crying in the airport. I was flying alone. So I ended up crying in the airport by myself because of this book. So I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it did happen. And yeah, it was just a really, really good story and I highly recommend it. The next book I want to talk about, I do not consider a recent favorite, but I still want to mention it just because it was a bit of a letdown. So it's like more of a recent letdown, I suppose. And that is Traitors Blade by Sébastien de Castell. I own one of Sébastien de Castell's middle grade series as well. I think it's called Spellslinger. I own the first book. I haven't read any of them, but I still really want to. I say this every year, but I will at some point read them, I promise. But he's also written fantasy for adults, and Traitors Blade Great Coats #1 is one of those books. What mainly piques my interest with this series is that it's set to be very humorous and very funny type of fantasy storytelling, which I usually really, really enjoy. But if you know like any fantasy series that you think I might enjoy that are like funny in the way that Six of Crows is funny, like sort of on the down low, you know? Not like comical fantasy, I don't know how to explain it. I just like when characters have really good banter. That's also what I enjoyed a lot about Mistborn. And for example, Terry Pratchett is definitely funny, but I just don't find him as funny, I guess. I mean, humor is subjective. He's definitely funny. But anyway, this is a whole side tangent. I'm so sorry. So what I was saying, Sébastien de Castell definitely is funny. And I think the first like 50 or so pages of this book, I was like, oh my god, it's a new favorite. It's for sure a new favorite. I'm obsessed. But then the story just started getting gradually more and more outrageous to the point where I was like, what is even going on? And like, why were these choices specifically made? It was just very confusing. My biggest issue is with this specific plot point slash occurrence that happens in these books. So if you don't want to be spoiled, please skip ahead. Also a trigger warning for sexual abuse. So if you don't want to hear anything of that, just skip ahead a bit, please. So the main character basically gets sort of sexed back to health by this weird nun. And it's such a strange plot point because he basically gets raped by her. Like, he says multiple times he does not want it. He's like, no, stop, no, I don't want this, no, I don't want it. And she like straddles him and he can't do anything and she just does it anyway. And I was just so perplexed by the fact that nobody on Goodreads and nobody I've seen reading this book has talked about this, and I was just like, what is going on? And then afterward, the main character's like happy this happened. He's like, yeah, but she did nurse me back to health by doing this act of intimacy. And I'm like, yeah, but you didn't want it. It was just really weird. And for that reason alone, this book was just not for me. But then just apart from that, the whole plot got convoluted towards the end. Like, everything was so random and I just felt like there was no point to any of it. And yeah, I did like the dynamics between characters and I did enjoy the writing, but that was just so weird and totally ruined it for me. So unfortunately, this was a recent letdown. Moving on from that was another recent favourite, and that is Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? Big Questions from Tiny Mortals About Death by Caitlin Doughty. This is one of those typical non-fiction books that I really enjoy that I know lots of people will hate. Just because it's like a very specific sort of comical non-fiction that's a bit silly, and I know lots of people when they read non-fiction they want to really like dive into topics and learn a lot of things and be like serious, I guess. I just really enjoy when stories are told with humour and like jokes, and the silliness gives it a little bit of whimsy, so I enjoy that personally, but of course to each their own. In this book, mortician Caitlin Doughty basically takes on questions from children, young children, talking about death, which is really nice because it's like sort of a taboo topic, and these children ask the most outrageous things you've ever heard. Like, they ask questions that I would have never even thought of. Like, for example, can you eat a bag of popcorn before you get cremated and would it then pop in the oven? Also questions such as, if I make a silly face and I would then get a heart attack, would my face be like that forever? So now I know lots of useless details about rigor mortis and what happens to a corpse and how somebody decomposes and stuff like that. I had a really good time reading this. It was silly, it was interesting, fascinating, sort of gruesome. I think this is a perfect book to read during Halloween times as well if you want something that is like intriguing and sort of gruesomely fascinating, but not totally frightening and like very scary. I think this would be a good book. Then I just want to mention a couple of books quickly in a row that I read on the beach during my holiday. The first one is Songs in Ursa Major by Emma Brodie, which is sort of Daisy Jones and the Six but different. So I think if you're like on the beach in Italy like I was and you just want a book that's like simple and reminiscent of something you really enjoyed and has interesting characters, just like a book you can sort of dive into, not think about too much, then this is perfect. But if you're looking for like a a really deep character study or anything like that, you're not going to get it from this novel. But if you like the 70s aesthetics and like the comeuppance of a band and stuff like that, band dynamics and the falling apart, and like a story about the music industry, story about famous people, I would highly recommend this. I really just enjoy reading about very famous people. I don't know what it is with me. This book definitely consumed me when I was reading it. I was obsessed with that at the time, but now I barely remember what happened. I just know that there was this girl, Janie Q, who got famous, and then she had a band, and she and her bandmate fell in love and then out of love, and there was drug issues as well. What a compelling summary of a story. I can understand you all watch my channel. I can't. Anyway, moving on. Then we have Idol by Louise O'Neill, which was sort of a shipwreck of a book. Mostly a shipwreck of a story, I would say, not necessarily the book so much. Like, I felt it was quite well written and plotted out. But the story itself is a shipwreck, but in the most interesting way. It's basically about this huge social media star who gets sort of cancelled for things she's done in the past. This also has to do with sexual assault, and it's quite heavy, so if you don't want to read anything like that, then definitely don't pick it up. Basically, she had this sort of gay awakening moment with a friend of hers where they had a mutual sort of first intimate experience. And she wrote a blog post about this. And then this friend comes forward and says that it was not mutual and it was not with consent, and she basically assaulted her. And instead of being a normal person, the main character decides to sort of start harassing this friend and going to her house and like dredging the toxic friendship back up again and trying to sort of fix this and make the friend see it from her point of view, even though she did maybe potentially assault this friend. Like, we don't know, we're sort of left in the dark as an audience, but immediately the main character is just the most unlikable person I've ever read about. It was like difficult at times. My sister also tried to read this book. We read together a lot of the times and we like swap out reads, and she could not get through it because she just thought the main character was absolutely insufferable. And I've heard that from other people as well. But I just thought it was wildly fascinating to see her whole life fall apart and to see the sort of the horrible consequences it can have if you are not willing to reflect on yourself and listen to other people sometimes if you've done something wrong, because this main character is so headstrong and she just does not want to accept criticism in any way or form, and it has made her literally delusional at some point in this book, and it was just very intriguing to me. Then I have 3 more recent favourites up in a row. I read so many good books recently. First, I have If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. This was a book that had been on my TBR for ages, and I did also discuss this in a reading vlog, so I'll just link that up here and try to not go into it too deeply in this video because I'm trying to sort of keep it concise. So I finally picked up this book and I enjoyed it massively. I like the secret history a lot as well. I love dark academia as a genre. I think it's so interesting, and I think there's lots of new interesting developments happening within the genre as well. I really liked the sort of art school take on it. I liked that we follow Shakespeare students in this story. I thought the dynamics and especially the tension build-up were exquisite in this book, just so well done. So if you want any of my more in-depth thoughts, definitely go watch that vlog. Then next I read Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldry, and I just can immediately feel like a huge smile coming to my face when talking about this, because this was just so good. Like, one of my new favourite books ever, I think I dare say. Yeah. Also listened to this on holiday, and I can just say, strolling through the Italian Sea whilst listening to something as wholesome and heartwarming as this was such a great experience. So this is about an orc who is basically an assassin, and she decides one day that she's going to quit being an assassin and she's going to start a nice little coffee shop in the center of this big high fantasy city. All the characters in this fantasy world are like, coffee, what is coffee? Like bean soup? Why would I want to drink bean soup? They're all very confused. But she starts this small business, and then some companions come and join her and work in the business, and it's just sort of a book that really highlights the little things, and it's a very funny combination of like starting a small business and like a cozy love story, but then also fantasy. It's not really a love story, but there's some queer romance in it. I just really enjoyed it. I just had a great time. And I love books where everything is just like cozy and nice. Then a next favourite is Confident Women, Swindlers, Grifters and Shapeshifters of the Feminine Persuasion by Tori Telfer. I don't think this is a perfect book by any means. Like, I read some criticism on Goodreads that I totally understand. Like, I do feel it does indeed maybe glorify the actions of the women in this book a little bit too much. But God, it was so fascinating to read about. The author, Tori Telfer, talks about all sorts of different women swindlers and scammers in this book. It's non-fiction. And I'm just really intrigued by scammers and like what drives them and what is the psychology behind it. Tori Telford did not dive into that as much, but I still just had a really good time reading about all these outrageous stories of scammers, both from history and more recent events. I also really liked that aspect that she went into history. I think this is mostly just a really interesting book to pick up in between reads if you want like a palate cleanser of sorts. I really enjoy this type of non-fiction where it's short sort of stories, like almost articles about a specific topic and then bundled in a book. So I think that's also where I really enjoyed it because of this structure. Then I'm just going to skip a few books that I've talked about already in my witchy videos and my vlogs. And then the first book that comes up again that I really want to talk about right now is Babel by Arif Kwong. Also made a reading vlog about this, so if you want to know more in-depth thoughts, go watch that. But by now I finished this book, so I have some more thoughts, I guess. I think Babel is a perfect example of a very interesting fantasy story that combines dark academia, big criticism on society, today's society, colonialism, racism. Arif Kwong is just brilliant. But I also feel like even though she really encapsulates sort of the dark academia vibes and the joy of being a student and the sort of wonder of learning magic and new things, she wrote that really well. It also reads really academically in a way, which is interesting in a dark academia book. It's like an interesting way to go. I think it's also just because Arif Kwong is a scholar, and I think the criticisms were very valid, and the experience of reading about somebody who's sort of torn between their homeland and the place they were brought to function for another country was very well done and intriguing to read about, and just an important topic to be discussed and to be read and written about. Now I just want to talk about one of the biggest issues. I'm not sure if it's an issue, but like one of the biggest things I had with this book, which is a bit of a spoiler. Well, I mean, it's a big spoiler. It's literally the end of the book. So at the end of the story, Robin brings down Babel. And I was crying at the end, okay? I was crying throughout the whole end because this book really had me in its clutches and I was really feeling it. But the thing is, it feels so inconclusive, like it doesn't matter at all. And maybe that was the point, and then it's definitely very strong. But at the same time, I just can't help feeling like, okay, but then the Empire will just rebuild it all like we have done in our world. And it'll just be the regular Industrial Revolution making this class divide happen instead of magic. And that's the thing. It felt so straight and narrowly copied from history, like that whole Industrial Revolution was now just magic, and it was so similar. I found it sort of amazing and fascinating, but at the exact same time it just made me wonder, like the magic is sort of pointless, like it could have just been the Industrial Revolution. So I'm not sure what my stance is on that actually, but all in all, like when we come back to the whole review, I would still highly recommend this book, and I would still say it's a very important and good piece of writing. According to me, at least. Okay, so now that we've had that whole Babel ramble, let's move on. The next book I want to talk about is Charmed Alive by Diana Wynne Jones. I had the best time reading this as well. Definitely a new favourite. Again, one of those sort of cozy fantasy stories to cuddle up with on the couch during the winter, like have a nice cup of tea, stuff like that. It also really gave me those feelings of discovering a new magical world as a child when you first start getting like really into reading, so I adored that. So this is about Cat and his awful sister, Gwendolyn, who I have a personal issue with. This is just like one of the most aggravating characters I've ever read about, and that's mostly because Cat keeps supporting his sister, even though she does the most awful things, and I'm just like, Cat, stop it! Like, oh my god, Cat, just So as you can notice, there's like some irritations there. Gwendolyn and Cat are orphans, and Gwendolyn is a witch, and she's so special because she's a witch, and because of that the great wizard Crestomancy comes and takes them to his magical castle where some other children are being taught magic as well, and they all receive magic lessons and just like regular school stuff. There's lots of weird and strange characters in this. It's just so fun to read about all these eccentric, eclectic people. The audiobook was amazing. Like, Tom Sawyer has one of the best voices to like narrate I've ever heard, like very similar to Stephen Fry, just like one of those deep voices. I really enjoyed that. And it had all the magic that Howl's Moving Castle has as well, and I think Diana Wynne Jones is just one of my favourite fantasy writers, probably. And yeah, the ending, the plot twist, kind of surprised me, even though this is a middle grade and usually I kind of see it coming. And then last but not least, I've read Dark Archives, a librarian's investigation into the science and history of books bound in human skin by Megan Rosenblum. This book was horrifying. This story is basically, like it says, a librarian's investigation. She's researching books bound in human skin, anthropodermic biblioplegy, which is a really difficult word for me, biblioplegy, I think. It's gruesome, but it's fascinating. It's just so compelling, even though it feels wrong on like all aspects to be reading about this. I think Megan Rosenblum really did a great job building this story and almost making it feel like a fictionalized telling of sort of a researcher diving deeper and deeper into this horrid subject. Like, she really describes like the old library cases at Harvard and like the fall leaves on the floor of like the grounds and the way she's walking through the crisp winter air and stuff, and that really sets the scene and makes it very atmospheric. I also liked that she shows like multiple sides to the debate about how we should treat anthropodemic biblioplegy. Like, should we consider those books historical artifacts that are to be treated with respect and to be researched to learn more from our past mistakes and ethical wrongdoings? Or should we treat them as human remains and bury them and release them back to the family, stuff like that? And especially when other power plays come into this, and I mean those are always present because we're talking often about like the poor that have been made into a book by this rich doctor back in the 1800s, then it's a really difficult question of what is ethical and what is a good thing, and like, should those books be in a university library when there's still a class divide? So all in all, very interesting topic, different standpoints. Not sure how I feel about it. If you were to ask my personal opinion. I'm just glad I don't have to decide on things like this because God, it's just horrid, and I can really understand, like, especially the side of viewing it as human remains, and maybe it would be more respectful to bury them. But for example, if there's like a family member, like a sort of descendant of that person still alive, and they feel it should be used for research purposes, then it's different already. But the thing is, like, sometimes there's multiple family members alive and they all feel differently. But also just the history aspect and all the little stories put into this book of like different instances of books potentially bound in human skin. Like, sometimes they turn out to be fake, and what is the story behind that, and what is like the history? All that was absolutely fascinating. So those were some of my recent favorite reads and one recent letdown, I suppose. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and had a good time watching me talk about my reads. Don't forget to check out the sponsor of this video, Book of the Month. Thank you so much again to them for sponsoring my content and enabling me to keep creating on here. And thank you guys all so much for being here and supporting my channel. If you don't know what to comment, leave a nice rose emoji down below so I know you've watched up until this point and you're still here. And I'll hopefully see all of you in my next video. Bye!